Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining in. My name is Anu Singh, and I'm Deputy Director at Carnegie India. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest for the evening, Ms. Bhandarkar, but she will be introduced in much greater detail. I will do her proper justice a bit later on. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Carnegie India to you. This series, the Anahita Speaker Series for Women, is hosted jointly by Carnegie India and the Vedika Scholars Program. Carnegie India is a New Delhi-based think tank, and we have deep analytical research in three areas: security studies, political economy, and technology and society. In addition, we make an effort to reach out to young people, men and women, all across the world who may not be our usual audience for our research. And in that context, this is a very important, significant initiative that we're so proud to be a part of. We think that apart from usual research, reaching out with inspirational messages is become even more important in this new crisis that we all find ourselves in. And this conversation designed specifically for women is perhaps the most important part of this initiative. And what makes it even more interesting is that in this series, we have a young woman talking to an experienced professional and getting insights into a life which has been rich, varied, as well as which has contributed a lot to this world. So with that, I will hand over to Deepa Kumar of Vedika Scholars to introduce our speaker, the Vedika Scholars Program and the run-off event. Thank you. You're on mute, Deepa.
Got technology. So sorry. Great. Good evening, everyone, to the Carnegie India and the Vedika Scholars Program's Anahita Speaker Series. I'll take a quick moment to briefly introduce the Vedika Scholars Program before we move on to welcoming our very special guest for this evening. The Vedika Scholars Program is an 18-month residential program with a reimagined MBA curriculum that has been carefully crafted to the expectations of our employers today. The mission of the program is to prepare women with potential to achieve fulfilling careers and create a cadre of successful women professionals for the 21st century who are equipped to crack the proverbial glass ceiling. At Vedika, we do recognize the importance of diversity and hope to leverage it for a better and more equal society and participate in the global movement to empower working women around the world. Our guest this evening is truly a perfect embodiment of our mission, Ms. Vedika Bhandarkar. Vedika is the Chief Global Impact Officer at Waterorg, leading the team responsible for working with financial institutions, global investors, and other sector leaders to empower millions of people in need with access to safe water and sanitation. Prior to joining Water.org, in January 2016, she served as the Vice Chairman and Managing Director at Credit Suisse Securities India Private Limited from 2010 to 2015. She was also the Managing Director and Head of Investment Banking at JP Morgan prior to that. She's got a fantastic career spanning over 25 years building businesses and, with Indian and international financial institutions. And she's also an independent director on board of several companies. A very warm welcome to you, Vedika. And I'll quickly, have Ishani take over. And very proudly, Ishani is also a Vedika scholar and who'll be interacting with you this evening. Over to you, Ishani.
Thanks a lot, Deepa. Good evening, everyone. I would like to welcome, first of all, Vedika for joining us today. I think it is very serendipitous that as a Vedika scholar, I'm inviting Miss Vedika to come and talk to us. And as Deepa rightly mentioned, her career is rich and spans over 25 years, and we have just 1 hour. Without further ado, I would like to begin. But before I do that, a note to our attendees. We will have a question answer session at the end. So whether you are streaming on YouTube or via the Zoom call, you can use the chat option or the comment option to drop in your questions, and we'll take them towards the end. So Ms. Vedika, my first question to you is, as a young woman in the financial banking and investment sector, which continues to be male dominated primarily even today, for you over 30 years ago, that must have been a very novel experience. So do you think that this space has changed? And what was it like to navigate it then? And how do you think it has changed now?
Thanks, Ishani. So first of all, thank you to both Carnegie Mellon and Vedika Scholars for having me here. I can only imagine how confusing it is to hear Vedika so many times, but it's a pleasure to be here. So, and you're right. I began my career 30 years ago. So I know Deepa mentioned 25 years, but I was when I was getting ready for this conversation, I was just doing some quick math and I realized I started working in 1989, so which is more than 30 years ago. So I started my career with ICICI, which at that point of time was a development financial institution. It wasn't a bank. This was before it converted into a bank. And you're right, the financial sector, at least the traditional view about financial sector has been and continues to be that it's a male-dominated sector. But as I hope you'll realize during this conversation, I'm a very optimistic person. So one of the first things I'll tell you is financial sector actually has much better gender diversity compared to several other sectors. And I also was very fortunate that I joined an institution, ICICI, which prides itself and prided itself even then on being very meritocratic. Plus, I had several colleagues, either of the same vintage as I or more senior, who were women. So, that was reassuring. This was the first time I was working. So I didn't have anything else to compare it with in terms of either gender diversity or any other diversity. At that time, as I said, ICICI was a development financial institution, and we made the institution made loans to companies in different industries. And all those loans, that lending department was called project finance, and which is where I started. The challenge I used to have was more often than not, I think maybe even more than 99 times out of 100, my clients were all men. And that in itself was not an issue for me, but the issue used to be how some of the clients or some of their clients' colleagues used to be very uncomfortable and did not know how to deal with a woman on the other side. And at that time, I did used to get sometimes angry, sometimes upset about this overt gender bias. But now I can look back and laugh at those experiences. And I'm happy to tell you some stories if you would like. But I think over the past 30 years, as I look back and look at the financial sector, which is what you asked me to do, I think, again, I'll start with the positives. So the positives are they continue to be, several examples or role models of women who have been very successful in the financial sector. So which is good. I think the other big positive is companies in general, banks, financial institutions, companies are much more aware. And diversity and inclusion is certainly not, is something which all companies are aware of. They want to do well in this. And so it's not a hidden away topic. So that's the second positive. I think the third positive is regulations have also helped. right? So for example, regulations around gender diversity on boards of companies, all of that has been very helpful. So those are the positives. On the negative side, I feel like we still haven't done enough. So the pipelines still tend to be pretty leaky, especially in the financial sector. So what do I mean by that? At the hiring stage, at the entry stage, often banks are very particular. They have a good gender balance, but by the time you get to VP or MD, the gender balance really dramatically drops. And so that's the leaky pipeline, right? So we've not been able to, the sector has not been able to address the leaky pipeline issue as well as it should, despite all the advancements in technology. Back when I joined, there was no email. There was certainly no internet. And so if you wanted an annual report of a company, you had to do a lot of hard work, which you no longer have to do today. And I think the other place where I feel we can do more is, while diversity is certainly much better understood and is much more top of mind, I think we still have some ways to go on inclusion. So diversity does not automatically lead to inclusion, right? And so you might have a much better, much more diverse workforce, but are you creating an environment where that diverse workforce feels included and feels like they really have a seat at the table? So on balance, lots of positive things, but still some ways to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response. I think as young women who are now going to be entering the field, it's nice to be cognizant of these things and to get these lessons from you. Now, you did have a very long career in the financial sector. It was only in 2016 that you made the shift to Waterorg. So my question to you is, and I'm very curious about this, did you always know that you'd be making a shift from the corporate sector to now the nonprofit or the social development sector? Can you think of any particular moment that led to this change?
So I'll be honest, I didn't know that I was going to make a shift to the social sector. I did know that I wasn't going to continue in investment banking forever. And don't get me wrong, I spent 25 years in investment banking, and I was very fortunate. I worked with great organizations. I worked with fantastic teams, and I worked in a time where India really opened up. So remember 1991, financial crisis, India starts opening up, and people like me of my vintage who worked in the financial sector in that time, in India, I think we were just very fortunate. We had all the experience as the market was opening up, transactions which we never thought were possible, right, were happening. Cross-border, complex M&As, capital raising, derivatives, all of this happened during when I was working in the financial sector. So I really enjoyed it. But I always thought to myself, when I turn 75, do I want to look back and say, okay, Vedika, what have you done as a professional? And if the answer is only investment banking, then I thought that's not really a complete and good answer. I also think that investment banking is a young people's world, right? So there'll always be somebody who is younger, leaner, hungrier, meaner, who will do the job better. And so you should realize that and move on before that person will take over. So that's the second. It's a slightly flippant reason, but I think the more deeper reason, and I really feel this, people like me, we have been very, very fortunate. We started working in the financial sector, as I said, when India was opening up. We did much better professionally and financially than we would have even thought of when we started our careers. And so I genuinely and deeply felt and continue to feel that there has to be a part of life where you need to do something to give back. And it can be different at different phases of life. At some phase of life, it might just be check writing, that's fine. At some phases of life, it might be volunteering, which is fine. But if, at some other phase, it has to be much more direct involvement. So that was the thought. When I left banking in 2015, I had no idea what I was going to do. And at that time, this new law came that all companies above a certain size need to have a minimum one woman director on the board. Suddenly, I was conflict free. So I was in demand. So I joined a few corporate boards. But that wasn't a day-to-day thing. So I started volunteering at an NGO. I'm still very involved with that NGO. It's a great organization called Jai Vakil, which works with intellectually disabled kids and adults. And I continue to be on their board. And when I started volunteering with them, and this might seem like a silly thing to say, but I wasn't very sure what skills I might be able to bring to the social sector. And I worked with them, volunteered with them for almost a year. And I realized that the 25 years of corporate life had given me a lot of skills and experiences, which I could use in the not-for-profit world. So, for example, how to scale up, how to think of processes, how to, think big, etc. And that gave me, then was the aha moment that, okay, maybe that's what I should be doing. The next innings should be in the development sector. And then I was very fortunate. Water.org, the opportunity came out of the blue. I did not know of the organization before. When I started talking to them, I started researching. And then there were three nice things which helped me make this decision. One was that I can use my financial sector training. So I have worked at the extreme wholesale end of financial sector, right? Investment banking is as wholesale as you can get. You only think in terms of millions and billions, and after some time, zeros lose their meaning. But I can use that training and that experience to the totally micro end and help make an impact. So that was one thing which really appealed to me. Second thing which really appealed to me was in our personal giving, we've always focused on women and girl children. And as I understood water and sanitation better, I realized that the lack of safe water and sanitation impacts women and girls much more adversely than it impacts men, right? Think of hours spent in terms of collecting water. Think of hours not being able to go and relieve yourself. Think of illnesses, etc. But the positive is also, the reverse is also thankfully true. So when a family does get access to safe water and sanitation, the positive impact on women and girls is much, much more than it is on men and boys. So that appealed to my heart, right? That this is a continuation of what I believe in. And the third thing is, I was just so impressed by the team at Water.org and by their model and the focus on sustainability that it was an easy decision. And here I am 5 years later.
That's a wonderful story. It's interesting that you mentioned how your career in the financial sector sort of helped you ease into also the nonprofit sector, and you mentioned scale and how zeros get lost. So coming to Water.org, and you've been working with them since 2016, it's an international organization that operates at scale in almost 20 countries. So what are some of your learnings in overseeing, these projects and these efforts working in different country scenarios? How do the solutions, to these issues differ across contexts? If you could share some words on that.
Sure. So we work in 13 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We have offices in 7 countries, but we work in 13. So in Asia, for example, we work in India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines, Cambodia. And then in Latin America, we work in Peru, Brazil, Mexico, and in Africa, in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, etc. So first of all, as you rightly said, these countries are vastly different, right? In all sorts of respects, and that is fascinating. But also, what's fascinating to me is to see how we can help share our learnings and sort of export what works in one country to another country and really help scale that up. Now, obviously, it's not a cookie cutter approach which works across all countries, right? So you have to adapt to that particular country's environment and the financial system. So maybe a quick word of what do we exactly do, right? So we are focused exclusively on access to safe water and sanitation for those living in poverty. And our belief is that one of the biggest barriers that stand between people and access to safe water and sanitation is the lack of upfront capital. So our work is around solving or overcoming this barrier. So enabling affordable finance so that people themselves can build the solutions which they want. And hence a large part of our work is working with financial institutions. And that the nature of the financial institutions can vary across countries. So for example, in India, we work with all sorts of financial institutions. We work with MFIs, we work with self-help group organizations, we work with banks. In Kenya, we work a lot with banks. In Latin America, we work a lot with cooperative institutions. So the nature of who we partner with, the financial institutions we partner with, can vary substantially across countries. The other thing which varies is we also work with water utilities, so especially in Southeast Asia. So Indonesia, Philippines, and Cambodia, for example, we work with small community-based water utilities. We work with medium-sized water utilities and even large water utilities, with the lens being, how can we help them serve people living in poverty? So that is, and now we're in the process of thinking about, how do we scale this work with utilities globally? How do we take this to Africa? How do we take this to Latin America? How do we bring it to India or Bangladesh? So that's incredibly interesting. And third is, I talked about knowledge sharing. So it's also about what works, sharing that, but also what doesn't work, right? Fail fast, learn from it, and make sure that we're not repeating the same mistakes everywhere. And I think the last point I would make is, even in normal times for an NGO, we need to be very, very conscious of making sure that we are spending every rupee or every dollar really carefully. So we can't afford to have to rebuild the same thing in every country, right? We need to make sure that we are not building, reinventing the wheel every time. And we're really leveraging what we've developed in terms of skills or capabilities, and really expand it across. So that's something my corporate background helps me in. And I think COVID has even further re-emphasized that point about how we need to be very mindful of our resources and make sure that we stretch them and work in as sustainable a manner as we can.
Right. I mean, you did mention that, the contexts are different, and being in your position, it must be extremely difficult to sort of, it's kind of like being a master of puppets in some sense, where there are different things, you have to try it in different places, see what works or what doesn't. Now, for somebody who's not been in these sectors, in upper notches of these sectors, terms such as managing director, which you've been with both JP Morgan and Credit Suisse, they can be ambiguous. So when it comes to Water.org, your role is the Chief Global Impact Officer. So, for the benefit of the audience and as well as my curiosity, could you share what your role entails in the organization as the Chief Global Impact Officer at Water.org?
Okay, great question. By the way, I've been doing this role only for the last 4 or 5 months. So before that, I used to run the India operations for Water.org. Right. So I'm also learning. So maybe it's a good time to say what I think the role is. So if I think of why we exist as an organization, we exist as an organization so that we can enable access to safe water and sanitation for those living in poverty, and that's impact. And that impact happens through different ways, all all the ways basically keep the person who does not have access to safe water and sanitation at the center. So the community is at the center, and all our work is around that community. So the ways we help create impact, as I said, working with financial institutions, working with utilities, often working with governments, right? And being, either nudging the governments or partnering with governments. So for example, in the last 5 years in India, when Swachh Bharat mission was launched, it gave our work huge tailwinds because our approach was very complementary to what the government's doing. Now we're very excited that Jal Jeevan mission has been launched because again, our work is very complementary. Similarly, very recently in Philippines, the new water and sanitation policy was adopted, which we did contribute to. So we're very, very excited about it. And then we also partner with organizations who might have complementary skills. So for example, UNICEF, we partner with them in multiple countries where they are really good at behavior change and how, in convincing somebody that you should change your behavior, you should build a toilet. And where we are partnering is in helping me, if I'm the person whose behavior has changed, get access to resources so that I can actually build a toilet. Or we might partner with organizations like Sadhan in India or IDB in Latin America, etc. So what my work is, or what my role is, to see as an NGO, our funding is really from donors. Right. So when donors give us these precious resources, my team, the impact team, is carrying out these interventions and initiatives in different countries. And some of them are scaling what has already been tried and tested before. Some of them are trying new things and seeing if they work. Some of them are about modifying what is already working in terms of making it sustainable. And many of them are a combination of all of these. So that's my responsibility, to look at it as a portfolio across countries as well as across initiatives and see, okay, which direction should we be going? What should we be enhancing? What should we be reducing? What should we be dialing up? What should we be dialing down? And keeping an eye on what's going to happen in the future, and really helping the organization turn to that direction. And as I said, I'm really, really fortunate because I work with a fantastic group of people who are passionate, committed, very smart, and it's just lovely working with them.
You mentioned that, Water.org is an enabling organization, which brings one to the idea of impact and how impact is really at the center of this. Now, the notion of impact is not exclusive to the nonprofit sector or the social development sector. Impact is also a key word, so to say, in the corporate sector. So for you, given that you've worked in both the sectors now, how do you think the assessment of impact sort of differs depending on where you are?
Great question. So the first thing I would say, and when I joined the social sector, I remember having this conversation several times with both sides. So what's fascinating to me is the distance between the two sectors, right? Often folks in the corporate world believe that, oh, social sector is all about bleeding hearts, and there is no discipline, there is no, there are no goals. It's about doing good, but no real discipline around it. So no measurements of impact, to your question. That's what the corporate world believes in. Often the social sector believes, oh, corporates are only about making money. They're only about pleasing the shareholders and the quarterly numbers. And they really are not focused on all the stakeholders, right? So shareholders being just one set of stakeholders, but the communities, the employees, the vendors, the customers being examples of other stakeholders. And this continues to amuse me. It amused me from the day I joined the social sector. It's still amusing. And I hope that that distance is crossed over time. And I can see, again, I told you I'm an optimist, so I can see that distance being slowly crossed. So what do I mean by that? So as you know, the narrative around capitalism is shifting, and people are talking much more about responsible capitalism, right? And they are talking about not just shareholders, it's a corporate's purpose is not just shareholders, but it's stakeholder satisfaction. And you and I can both name several companies who always followed it, but not all the companies, right? So the good news is from the corporate side, that journey has started. Similarly, from the social sector side, there is this big realization that one, there isn't enough money in the world. So you can't say, okay, philanthropy will make you solve everything. You have to think in terms of how can you do this sustainably? How you can't do this all alone. How can you do this in partnerships? And how can you have more responsible financial metrics around it? And so what is interesting to me is both sides are moving towards each other in terms of how they are looking at impact. They're still speaking slightly different languages, but I'm very confident that over the next few years, a common set of language will emerge. Now, I'll give you an example. In our sector, in water sector, water is a big risk for many companies. And companies are increasingly realizing that, right? Historically, people would just say, oh, water is such a small percentage of my cost, of my operating costs, that I don't really need to worry about it. But the day zeros all across the world, the climate change is showing everybody that you do need to worry about it. You need to worry about what you're doing to the reservoir. You need to worry about communities living around it. So you need to worry about sustainability, access, etc. So now companies are looking at, okay, if I partner with an NGO which solves the issue of access, can I develop measures which are quantitative, which are defendable, which I can talk about. So people are talking about volumetric measurements, etc. So I can see that convergence happening. I think we're maybe a few years away, a couple of years away, but it's interesting how both sides are moving towards each other. And that gives me hope, honestly.
Taking from that note, you are an optimist, and in times like these, we need more people like you to also spread this hope. And I think the point that you made about, the perceived distance between the corporate sector and the social development sector is very real, because I think the social development sector also cannot function without structure, right? It's not just a flimsy little puddle on the side. They have systems in place, and especially when you have an organization at scale, such as the one, that you're working at, which also brings me to the question of how these problems with day zero are not only facing the weaker sections, because we always talk about how there's the weaker section or the marginalized sections that facing them, which brings me to my next question. Is there any way, or is there any scope for the financial sector, for these corporate giants, not just giants, in fact, they're already doing their bit, but for these corporate actors to sort of alter the way they operate in order to better address the needs of groups that are low income or the weaker sections of society? Because of course the brunt that we face of these problems is then at scale and not sectional. So if you could share some thoughts on that.
Wow, that's a very big question. So we could talk about this for hours, right? So I think, and I probably quote first the CEO and co-founder of Waterorg, Gary White, and he always says this, and this has stuck with me. And he says, the poor are not a problem to be solved. They are a market to be served. And I think that's really fundamental when you start thinking that way. And if you think in terms of our work, our partnerships with financial institutions, right? When these financial institutions are making small loans to borrowers who need to either get a pipe water connection at their home, or they need to build a toilet, or they need to build a rainwater harvesting structure. The loan is being given on commercial terms. It's business for the financial institutions. And it has to be business because that's the only way it will stay sustainable, right? Because if it's not business, the minute that philanthropy stops, it will, the financial institution will also stop. And we're not reinventing a channel, right? We are really leveraging the channels which are already working. And if you think of microfinance institutions, if you think of self-help group organizations, you think of cooperatives, you think of big banks, they have been serving people living in poverty. And they continue to scale that, sometimes nudged by regulators like RBI with their priority sector, and sometimes just because it's good business, right? So I think, again, first the optimist hat on. The good news is that people are, large organizations like financial institutions are serving this segment of the population. Even among, if you look at consumer companies, FMCG or consumer durable companies, they'll all talk about, it's the earnings season right now, and you'll always hear commentary about rural demand. So I think all of that's good. What can be done better is, first starting with the financial sector, is again, the right product for the right population, right? It's not about making everything low cost. It's not about just making a small sachet like the shampoo sachets, which became an incredible hit, right? But it's also about understanding the consumer better. What insurance does she want? Does she really need? What are other services? How can we improve the fulfillment of that service? How can we improve the delivery mechanism? Right now, COVID's forcing everybody to be more digital. So how can it be done in a way which appeals to and is non-threatening to the consumer? So I would say, again, great efforts being done, but some ways to go. And in our work with financial institutions, often the first comment the financial institution will make is, oh, a loan for water or a loan for sanitation? It doesn't sound like a productive loan. So how will she repay? How will the borrower repay? And that's where our track record, the evidence which we have, as well as all our knowledge comes into play. But I think the more financial institutions as well as companies look at, how can we serve these communities, I think the better will be the solutions. And again, that's a journey all of us are on.
Yeah, I think it's always also difficult to sort of separate yourself from your experiences. I can already from your words understand how your experience prior to your joining in Water.org is helping you navigate these, sort of spaces, because people like you have had a foothold in both. So that sense of suspicion or, a sense of ignorance fades away a little bit. And it's been really interesting hear you talk about these things, and with hope and optimism that these convergences do happen. We have in the audience with us a young group of women from Vedika Scholars Program who, are sort of starting their journey to enter into the world of jobs. And so, and this is my last question before we move on to the Q&A with the audience. And that is, what advice do you have for, young women like yourself who, on the one hand, have, financial ambitions and career ambitions? They want to make it in life, and that's extremely important. And on the other hand, also, want to invest their time and energy into something that affects social change, or that, works towards the betterment of the society, especially in times like these when sustainability, for instance, is a very big challenge that, of course, does affect women more. So in this context, what advice do you have for young women like myself who will be stepping into, your shoes as we go ahead?
So can I answer it? And I know I'm keeping an eye on time, but I'm going to give you two sets of answers to this. So first of all, I'll admit I moved into the social sector only after 25 years of working, right? So to that extent, take my advice with a huge pinch of salt, because I did not go through that decision making or that choice when I started my career. But I would offer two comments. One, the environment today is very different. 25, 30 years ago, very few companies were thinking about sustainability, or even when they were thinking about sustainability, there was a different sustainability wing, and then there was business. I think today what's interesting is so many companies are increasingly moving to sustainability being an integrated part of business. It's no longer a nice to have, something to put in your annual report, but it's really being integrated into day-to-day business. And honestly, that's being driven by your generation. It's being driven by the Gen Z, right? You're demanding it from companies as consumers when you consume their products, but you're also demanding it from companies when you are the employees. So that's the good news. So the first message I would give is you can have both, impact as well as a financially rewarding career today, much better than you could ever have in the history. The second thing I would say is I'm really humbled by my colleagues at Waterorg. There's so many young colleagues globally, in India, in all the other countries, who want their every bit of work to count, and who start their careers with organizations like ours. And so again, that would be my second message, that there are lots of people, and I often say that your generation is the conscience keeper of the world right now. And then the last thing, and I know you didn't ask me, but I'm going to give some advice because I'm older here. So I'm going to give some advice to all young women and men who are starting their careers or are young in their careers. And I'll go through this quickly. One, be greedy. And when I say be greedy, there's always, what is she talking about? Has she forgotten that she's no longer in investment banking? No, I have not forgotten that. But I say be greedy is, if you want, then you can certainly have a good career and a good family life. Don't make that decision in your mind that you can only do one or the other. That's not true. So if you want to be greedy, absolutely be greedy. Second, ask and speak up. Often women or men are too scared to ask. And I always tell myself, what's the worst that could happen? Think about it. If the worst that could happen is somebody says no, that's not the end of the world. So speak up, right? 3, take risks. Don't think your career is always going to go like this. There will be lateral moves. Be open to those lateral moves. Beware of imposter syndrome. It's very real. And everybody has it. When you think, oh, I'm here just because of this, just because I'm a woman, or I'm here just because they needed a young person. No, you're here because you're really good at what you do. Find good supervisors, very important. Build networks in your personal life, build networks professionally. Be ruthlessly disciplined. There will be times in your life when you have young family or you're a caregiver to somebody else, where you can only concentrate on A, B, or C things. Don't try and do A to Z, right? Be ruthlessly disciplined about how you divide your time. Do not look back. Sometimes you will make choices which don't feel that good. And then you start thinking, oh, if I had done this, there's no point. You can't turn back the time. Learn from it and move on. Be fair. You will need a lot of help. So be generous in praising and acknowledging help when you get there. And openly acknowledge help, whether again, it's personally, if your family is stepping up or your colleagues are stepping up, or both, just be generous in praising. Be authentic. Often women go through this. They think, oh, if I have to be successful, I have to behave like a man. All of us spend more of our working hours at work than we do anywhere else. So if we are not our real selves, it will be really hard. So develop your own style. It comes with time, but be authentic. And the last one is pay it forward. There were many women who helped me as I walked through my career, and I hope I can continue to help and do the same. I would urge all the girls. So I know you didn't ask me for this, Ishani, but I thought I'll give you this.
I think a bonus is always appreciated, Vedika. I'm really glad that you, took your time to sort of go over these thoughts and share them with us. Like you said, we have to be open, and if we weren't open, we wouldn't have had the chance to have you share your wisdom, because that is priceless. Given that you've spent so long in this sector, it's been really wonderful. Getting the opportunity to have this conversation with you. It's been inspiring, and it's been a great practical learning as well, because there are skills that we need as we enter the world as more responsible working as a more responsible young working force, and especially as working women. So with this, we have a lot of questions coming in. So if it's all right, we'll take the first question here. And so this is a question from Yamini Giri, and the question says, how do Water.org's beneficiaries react to the interventions that try to bring about behavioral changes? I think she's referring to the part where you talked about, working with organizations like UNICEF. How long does it take for a family to adopt safe water and sanitation practices?
Sure. So again, I think a lot of it depends on the time at which this change is happening. So if I rewind to when Water.org started in India, for example, which was in early 2000s, it was a very hard message. For example, the message around stopping open defecation was a very hard message. Or even people building their own toilets, right? Because they said the government should build it for them. Today, we find that on water quality. If the water looks clean, it doesn't smell, then people think it's fine. There's no need to purify it. So I think one is the timing or the context in which this message happens is very important. I talked about Swachh Bharat mission, right? So for 5 years, there was such a big campaign from the government, from Bollywood, from all sorts of personalities talking about behavior change, talking about ending open defecation. That brought about a huge change in terms of how fast the behavior change was happening. And today, I have to say, and it seems like a really heartless thing to say, but COVID is accelerating that behavior change. So what's happening in COVID during lockdowns and even after lockdowns, everybody is seeing the messages around washing hands, and they're seeing the messages around social distancing. How do you wash your hands if you don't have access to water at home? And how do you practice social distancing if you have to go and collect water, or if you have to go and to relieve yourself, right? You don't have a toilet at home. So again, and this is happening across the globe, COVID is accelerating that behavior change. And the behavior change, the last thing I would say, is very contextual. It differs not just country to country, the drivers, but often state to state, the drivers might be really different. And it's about really listening to the community, and the behavior change is sustainable only if the community believes in it. So the most successful institutions are the ones who use members of the community to change the behavior. And that's when the behavior, because if I'm listening to somebody from my own community talk about it, I will believe her much more than I would believe somebody who's just coming for a day from somewhere else.
Yes, that does make sense. It's a good segue into another interesting question we have from Inayat Walia, who's asking, what are your views on decentralization of water provisions, especially in the Indian context where, water is centralized? What are your thoughts on the private sector participation when it comes to water provisions?
So, it's a great question, and water is a very complicated subject. So I don't know how much folks are familiar with this Jal Jeevan mission, which has been launched. So first of all, water is not a central subject, it's a state subject. Okay, so then that's important to remember. But Jal Jeevan mission, which is focused on every household to have pipe water access by 2024. And so, both the center and the states have to work really closely together. But what they're trying in this mission, and this has been tried, by the way, in several countries, including Indonesia, is the responsibility of water, including the groundwater, lies with that community. So in Indonesia, what they do is they create these community-owned water utilities. These are small organizations. They might serve 100 households, they might serve 500 households, they might serve 1,000 households. And they are really responsible for the water resource management, as well as delivering water to all the households. India is, through Jal Jeevan Mission, is trying something similar. But the reason I said it's a complex issue is because I think it's a good reminder that globally, 70% of the water usage is agriculture. In India, 80% of the water usage is agriculture. Then comes industry, and then come the households. And households are really only around 5%. So I think increasingly there is need to look at it in a very, very integrated manner. You can't say, okay, I will only focus on this piece of water while agriculture is going to be different, or while something else is going to be different, because the extraction, and again, we know this, right? India is extracting more water from ground than it is replenishing. So to the question, what can corporates do? I think there's a lot corporates can do, and they are doing. So work on the sustainability of the water resource. That's incredibly important. A lot of corporates, you might have noticed, are making goals of net zero water, right? So circularity, so reuse of wastewater, that's the other. And three, so, manage that stakeholder relationship where the stakeholder are the communities, where the corporate is enabling safe water and access to the communities, say around their factories or around their offices, etc. So I think corporates can do a lot. And I do think it's really necessary. And I know we are running out of time, but I'm going to give some statistics. So the World Bank estimates that $114 billion per year are required to be spent by the world every year from 2016 to 2030 for everybody in the world to get access to safe water and sanitation. The amount of money which is being currently spent is only about 30 billion. So there's a huge gap. And to meet that gap, we need all actors. We need governments, we need development financial institutions, we need financial institutions, we need corporates, and we need investors. So all of them have to act together.
Those are some great numbers. It really makes you think about the problems. We have time for one last question, and we have a very interesting question which also sort of delves into what you were talking about, how you take agricultural first, then you take the industrial needs and the households at the last. And technology has played a really big role in sort of easing some of the ways in which we can deal with these problems. So we have a question from Akanksha Ahuja, who's asking, can you share some examples of technology and innovation in the water management sector in India that have been employed by Water.org?
Okay, so I think 2 or 3 comments. So first of all, we Water.org doesn't really push for one technology versus the other, and we're technology neutral. And we're also, you and I talked about this, right? Our work is all about scaling. So we're not really helping technologies go from R&D to pilot stage. That's not where we can add value. There's some great organizations which can add value. But what we can do is work with what is already working and give the consumer, the community, the choice. So I wanted to clarify that. But in India specifically, I think there's some great work being done around drip irrigation. So just starting with agriculture, that's not where we work, but as I said, agriculture does use 80% of water. So we do need technologies to work there. There's also some fascinating work being done around gray water recycling and generally water recycling and fecal sludge management and water reuse. So that's the second one. And the third, which is still, third is around water purification. So we did not talk about it, but water quality is a huge issue, right? And it's not just the pathological impurities, but it's also arsenic, it's fluoride, etc. So there's some great technologies around water purification. And the last one, which I'm personally very excited about, but it's still very small scale, is converting the atmospheric water into pure drinking water. And just think about it. I mean, the mind boggles, right? And as the costs come down, and the costs are a little high, but with scale, the costs will come down. I think that will be fantastic for the world. So I'm very excited about that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's definitely mind-boggling. I mean, one can only imagine how it would be if we could convert atmospheric particles into potable water. I would like to end the session with this before I hand over to Anu. Thank you so much, Vedika, for sharing your insights with all of us. It's been dynamic, it's been engaging, and it's been extremely thought-provoking. So thank you so much for that. Anu, over to you.
Thanks, Ishani. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Vedika, and thank you, Ishani. Really, this conversation has been a pleasure. I mean, the young women and men out there would have found it very inspirational, but even somebody at my age learned a lot. And, early on, Vedika, you talked about, when you were talking about Waterorg and how it operates in different countries, you used the phrase fail fast. And that really stuck with me. I think it could be a mantra for everybody, each one of us. When you also talked about risk taking, that it's fine, take the risk, fail fast, move on. And I think that should be actually very reassuring that, nothing is forever, things will change. So why be so scared? And also the fact, the gap that you talked about between the corporate and the so-called social sector. And I agree that, we would have evolved, we would have really reached this wonderful place once this gap closes as a whole society, when there isn't that much of a difference between investment banking and the social sector, to speak of. And the fact that you have traversed this gap is a sign of changing times. It's a sign of hope. And we take sort of great courage from that. So thank you very much. Really, it's been quite extraordinary. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. And I just want to say, age is only in the mind, Anu.
Yeah, I hope so too.
Thank you so much, Vedika. And, it's been such a fantastic and wonderful insights. And in fact, a lot of the good advice that you've given and invaluable advice that you've given these young people who are, stepping into the workforce, it's a lot that resonates with what Vedika does and, goes along with Vedika's credo and what we would like to call the Vedika way of life. So fantastic. And thank you for, sort of reiterating all of those values to these young women out here and men. But thank you so much for a lovely, lovely evening.
Thank you, Deepa. My pleasure. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.